we're going to pass on presentations for today and move directly to public comment. Members of the public wishing to address the commissioner are subject to a time limit of 5 minutes and must complete a public comment registration card located at the entry. Should a member of the public bring an item to the commission for which the subject was not posted on the agenda of the meeting, state law provides that the commission may receive the information but cannot act upon it at the meeting. The commission may direct staff to contact the requester or request that the issue be placed on a future agenda for further discussion. And with that, we're going to take Uvalde up first. We've asked Senator Roland Gutierrez to speak to lead the group. So, Senator, please. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Chairman. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be here with you today. Chairman, I would ask your indulgence, and I might be a little bit more than 5 minutes, but I promise I won't be more than that. And I would also ask you to indulge these families who at various times have talked at different governmental entities and have been cut short. I know that they will all be respectful of your time as well, and of this committee, but they do need to be heard. And so I think that some of the failures that have happened by government have been by specifically that, cutting them off and not letting them get heard. They will all be very respectful of your time. And also, we appreciate you postponing your award ceremony because we just didn't feel it was appropriate. And so we certainly appreciate that action today. What I say to you today, Chairman and members, is not personal at all. I highly respect law enforcement, and I respect the people that serve in this department. I happen to think that Steve McCraw is a very nice man. I know that I've called for his resignation many times. And I believe that it's warranted. But I do have some prepared comments, and we'll talk about that shortly. You know, most people in this state will never realize what it is to witness gun violence up close. The officers in that room certainly have realized it. I now have realized it. I know exactly what you know, and I've seen what you've seen. Most people will never see what a weapon does, what an AR-15 can do to a child's body. That all came true on May 24th in Uvalde. For these parents, their lives will never be the same. They wake up every day from a dream thinking life's okay. A minute later, knowing that they're living in this horrible reality. I asked my friends, because we've become friends over the last 5 months, how they do this, how they can get up and speak in front of you. And I simply don't know how they can muster up the power to be able to come here and relive the events of that day. They're all hurting, and they're doing their very best to heal. But I think that the only thing that they can really do and look forward to is a duller sense of pain. I would expect that you're all parents, and so I would also ask you to indulge me in thinking about your own children when you think about Uvalde. For the rest of us in Texas, Uvalde shattered another illusion entirely, and it shattered our belief that we could trust the word and the actions of law enforcement, especially the Department of Public Safety. On or about 11:33, May 24th, a young man, an 18-year-old, walked into a school, killed 19 kids and 2 teachers, wounded many others. At 11:36, a Uvalde PD entered the hallway, tried to engage the shooter. One of them was injured with some shrapnel in that volley of gunfire. The Uvalde PD officers retreated. They sought cover. Very shortly after, the DPS officers began to show up in a mass in the hallway as well, including some rangers, or one ranger. For more than an hour, law enforcement, as you know, from around the state arrived, but no matter how many law enforcement officers arrived, it got to a huge number. No action was taken until 12:50. In the end, even though there was 91 DPS troopers responding to Robb, none participated in the breach that terminated in the threat Uvalde. There were many DPS officers in the hallway that were highly trained. We know that from the legislative report, and well equipped, and yet they waited for one thing, and it wasn't for keys to arrive. They waited for a federal team a BORTAC team to arrive. As a result of that inaction, as Senator Campbell suggested in the Senate hearing, in that golden hour, more lives were lost. The average mass shooting in the United States takes 10 minutes. We had a mass shooting at a high school in St. Louis 2 days ago. That high school had all of the locked doors. It had metal detectors. It didn't stop that shooter. And in 14 minutes from the time he entered, in 14 minutes, he was dead. 14 minutes. In this situation, these children waited 77 minutes, waiting for BORTAC to arrive. Children trapped in a classroom had the courage to seek help by calling 911 over and over again. Law enforcement knew there were kids inside. If you have not seen the footage of last night's television reporting, we have new coverage, leaked out coverage of DPS troopers standing outside, philosophizing about how this happens so often, saying to themselves, hey man, there's kids in there, we need to go in. Are you gonna put yourself in danger? You're gonna put yourself in danger. That's what one officer said to the other. That was said on multiple occasions. This wasn't the school superintendent or the school ISD cop, wasn't Uvalde PD. These were DPS troopers. I can't open that window because I'm gonna get clapped. That's what he said. Came out on television last night. No help arrived. We will never know how many children could have been saved. 2, 3, 4. A few died on the way to the hospital. Eva Mireles died on the way to the hospital. The actions by DPS in the aftermath of the shooting are nearly as egregious as their inaction on May 24th. Initially, DPS, through a spokesman of the governor's office, said that the shooter was an illegal immigrant from El Salvador. That was completely false. And if the governor's office got that from someone else, perhaps they did. But that's what they put out initially. That the man's name, that he was from Salvador and he had a fake Texas ID. El Salvador. Then DPS briefed the governor, and the governor told Texas that the shooting could have been worse, if not for the actions of law enforcement that day. We already know that that statement was retracted days later. Colonel McCraw called the actions of law enforcement an abject failure. He was right. But it wasn't just the actions of Pete Arredondo, the school ISD cop. You see, we don't go into mass shootings looking at MOUs to determine who's in charge. When indeed we all know that Pete Arredondo never once communicated to anybody, hey, I'm the incident commander, didn't wear a shirt saying I'm the incident commander, didn't even have a radio. And for that matter, the radios that this community had asked DPS to help them fix 5 years ago didn't work. In a quest for blame, we go after Pete Arredondo, the first person. It was him, it was him, it was him. And then, of course, there is the general comment that, hey, when one of us fails, when one cop fails, we all fail. I'm sorry, but that's just, it's not good enough. Saw her story the other night. Amy kicked a rock out of the way, closed the door behind her. She had walked in 3 times into that building. She went back for her cell phone thinking it was an accident, came in, kicked the rock, clear as day. I accidentally, they don't know this, I accidentally walked into a trailer one day, argued with Victor Escalon about something or other. As I was leaving that portion of the trailer, I walked into the other side and I see 9 guys in cowboy hats looking at a video over and over and over again. Doesn't matter what video it was. They just kept hitting rewind. For 5 days, That message was put out by your director for 5 days that Amy Marin left that door open. That woman cannot speak the same anymore. And I'm not suggesting that Steve McCraw or anybody at this agency caused the initial trauma, but she was repeatedly traumatized by a community that levied death threats on her because this agency, who I know saw that video over and over again, said she left the door open. And the only apology to date to Amy Marin has come to an ABC News Network statement. That's it. After interviewing DPS officers, some 60 days later, an alert report comes out. Ironically, see, there's no Hatch Act in the state of Texas. Ironically, the mayor and I send out a letter to the governor. The very next day, we now have a fresh alert report chock full of lies. And the biggest thing in that alert report that everybody in all this media picked up on was that the Uvalde PD could have shot this guy. 60 days later, that report was given to them by DPS, and that report said that this guy, that the Uvalde PD could have shot him. Chairman, they knew the second part of that statement. They had it for 60 days. The second part of that statement was that, and after looking back, the guy he was going to shoot was the PE coach. They knew that, and yet they put out this faulty, fictitious report. Then, prior to this, Colonel McCraw testified in the Senate that the classroom door had malfunctioned and that the local law enforcement had spent time looking for a key. This was also not true. They didn't wait 77 minutes to open the door. They waited for BORTAC. For much of the last 5 months, DPS has had selectively leaked information in order to hide those actions. Let me be clear, as I said earlier, I know exactly what you know. And if you haven't seen the videos, go sign their NDA so you can see it all for yourselves. I assure you, take those home. You'll never want to see another one. You'll never want to see what I've seen again. And you won't be the same. DPS failed on May 24th. It failed to take control of a dangerous situation. It failed to neutralize an ongoing threat. It failed in the aftermath of the shooting by not following normal triage protocols with the injured. It failed in the days following the massacre by giving false information that was easily, provably false. And it is failing today by continuing to not disclose all of the information that is important to us today and dribbling out, again, sanctions against low-level cops, officers, troopers, when in fact we need to look at the people that were supervising those people and the people that were making decisions like Joel Betancourt, who made a decision at the minute 76 to again not go in. How much longer did he want us to wait? Were we supposed to have Ruben Zamora's daughter die? Who made it to the hospital just barely and was in the hospital for 124 days with 6 bullet wounds? Colonel McCraw requires each DPS agent to carry a card on their person. The card says its core values are integrity, excellence, accountability, and teamwork. DPS failed at every one of those values. I urge you to read that card so you read the descriptions of each one of those things. They failed every single day. They failed on those values every day. And the only way forward is for this agency to tell the complete truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth going forward. Release the information, have real accountability, own up to their inaction, make restitution to the victims. This agency needs to make restitution to the victims. Find a way where we're going to get beyond qualified immunity on Texas Tort Claims Act and make real restitution to the victims. And take action so that nothing like this ever happens again. This is the bare minimum of what I would expect of this commission. Until every one of those things happens, this community and these families, they will not rest and they will not stop. And you just might see 3 of them here, 3 different sets of families here. But I promise you, they are mighty and they come in force. And they're not going to stop until they get accountability they get actions. Again, I don't want to take too much of your time. I really thank you for your indulgence. This has all been a very sad moment in our state's history. I know it's difficult for every one of us, but we have to face the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Next up, we have Brett Cross, who is a family member. Brett, will you please come to the podium? Thank you for being here today.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate this opportunity to come before y'all and speak. With that being said, I'd like to talk about numbers. You see, it's been 5 months and 3 days since my son, his classmates, and his teachers were murdered, totaling 21 victims. That's 156 days, 3,741 hours, 224,497 minutes, 12,469,820 seconds. While these numbers regularly change, several numbers remain the same. It was 77 minutes that 91 of y'all's officers waited outside while our children were slaughtered. One of your officers has been fired, one, and that's Juan Maldonado. Yet we know that Captain Joel Betancourt failed. Per Mr. McCraw's own words, he, Betancourt, wasn't in any position to direct any DPS resources. If he wasn't in a position to direct resources, then why did he feel like he had the authority to do so? If it was clear that he didn't have the authority, then doesn't that mean he was in violation of DPS policy? And if that is the case, why is Betancourt still working as an active duty officer? Again, Betancourt's orders that day were to not enter the building, but to remain on the perimeter while children were dead and dying. I can't speak for everyone, but I can say that given what I've seen, I am highly concerned about Betancourt's ability to protect and serve the people of Texas. Additionally, we have heard that Betancourt's actions once he arrived there were under investigation. If he is under investigation, again, we ask, why is he an active duty cop? The only determination I can make is because he's seen as a model officer and a rising star within DPS and is part of the Good Old Boys Club and plays a key role in Operation Lone Star. Now, per Mr. McCraw's own words, and I quote verbatim, "Hey, I'll be the first to resign, okay? I'll be gladly resign. I will tender my resignation to the governor, okay? If I think there is any culpability with the Department of Public Safety, okay?" We know that one, Maldonado was served with termination papers because of his failures on May 24th. Two, Betancourt's response on May 24th was in clear violation of DPS policy. You, sir, have told lies. You're not in control of your officers, nor are you the leader this great state deserves at the helm of what was once known as one of the best law enforcement agencies. You have disgraced the state, your position, and the people. The officers still under your supervision, Maldonado, Betancourt, and Kendall, have been proven to have been culpable, and with new information dropping just about weekly, we know that there will be others. Well, Steve, the time is now. If you're a man of your word, you'll resign. We're not waiting any longer. Our families, our community, our state has waited long enough. And playing politics will only put the lives of more Texans at risk. Regardless of the election, I expect determinations and your resignation immediately. Before I leave, I'd like to remind y'all why we're here. And their names are Uzi Garcia, Lexi Rubio, Jackie Cáceres, Amarie Jo Garza, Tess Mata, Maite Rodriguez, Ellie Garcia, Rogelio Torres, Xavier Lopez, McKenna Elrod, Layla Salazar, Miranda Mathis, Nevaeh Bravo, Jose Flores Jr., Eliana Torres, Annabelle Rodriguez, Jayla Seguero, Alithia Ramirez, Eva Morales, and Irma Garcia.
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Our next speaker is Jesse Rizzo. He represents the family as well. Mr. Rizzo, please.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to speak today. Really appreciate it. My name is Jesse Rizzo, and I'm Jackie Cáceres' uncle. And this is Juanita Cáceres, Jackie's aunt. Before I get started, I have something written down, but just to illustrate and to hopefully convey the message as to what the families go through, what we have to go through every single time, whether you're flying out somewhere or you're getting on a bus to issue a statement, or you're driving 3.5 hours to get to Austin. Some family members drove in tonight. They hit the road around 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, got here. And every time this happens, they have to build up the courage, the strength, and I call it lay it on the table. Every single time. We have a friend that we made now, Caitlin Gonzalez, and she's powerful. She comes, she delivers her message. As soon as she delivers that message, you can see just how she shatters every single time. And that's what it's like when we come up here. May look strong, we may sound strong, but inside we're falling apart. That's our reality. That's what it seems like. I'm just one of Jackie's uncles. Jackie comes from a very large family, very pretty little girl, sweet little girl, caring little girl, compassionate, hugging, always the first one to welcome you in, made you feel loved, smiling. I can go on and on. That's just one story though. Every single child, both of those teachers, that's all they ever had was nothing but love, nothing but sacrifice for their students. So coming up here, speaking about them, it's again painful. May 24th was our 9/11 in Uvalde. Our lives have been turned upside down. Our town is ripped apart. And when I say that, I don't know what's worse, losing a child or losing a teacher, a mom, a wife. I don't mean any disrespect. That's what I'm about to say. But the aftermath that came after that was absolutely unacceptable, hurtful, painful. Typically, when situations like this come up, you expect people to tell you the truth, to be transparent, to own up to their mistakes. Not much to it. But every single time seemed like a lie after a lie, misinformation, roadblock after roadblock. And you can't begin the healing process. There's never going to be where you forget things. But every single time that this comes up, it opens the wound. It's exactly what happens. Every single time a video comes up. And to what Mr. Gutierrez said, Mr. McCraw, you have all the resources in the world. You are from the state of Texas, a great state of Texas. You had every single thing at your disposal, and yet you come out, your staff comes out, and misinformation after misinformation. And it continues to happen, Mr. McCraw. We feel that when this occurs, you're actually adding insult to injury every single time that you do this. We have been met with challenges at the Uvalde School District, at the Sheriff's Office, State Police, Governor Abbott. And I'm here today, Mr. McCraw, to let you know what impact these statements that were issued by you and your administration have had on our small community. Our town is divided. Our teachers feel betrayed. Some family members don't even speak to each other. We go to the grocery store. We have to look over our shoulder because you don't know who's with you or against you or agrees with you, disagrees with you. That's our reality, Mr. McCraw. Your comments had a ripple effect on many agencies. People have lost trust in law enforcement and each other. Your officers either lied to you or you painted a picture that was favorable to your department, sir. Miss Amy Marin, who was one of the teacher's aide and was blamed for leaving the door recently gave her account as to what she's been through. At the very least, sir, you owe her an apology for that. She's never going to be the same. Mr. Arredondo rightfully lost his job, but all the blame was placed on him. To make my point, when you arrived, your statements that were made in Uvalde and your administration, you basically lit a match and you set the town on fire. It's time for you, sir, to keep your word and offer your resignation and turn in your badge, Mr. McCraw. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Next speaker this morning is Manuel Rizzo, who represents a family as well. Mr. Rizzo.
First of all, thank you for the opportunity. This isn't who we are. This isn't what we do. Our families are hurt. The community is divided. Your commission has a duty for the citizens of the state of Texas. You have a duty to make this right, and we need something done now. My name is Manuel Rizzo. It's my wife, Julissa Rizzo. We're Jacqueline Cáceres' uncle, aunt, and godparents. On May 9th, she had a communion, a beautiful communion and celebration at our house. Days later, she was murdered on May 24th. Her family is right here with us, her parents. They've been outspoken in the community. We've been in Austin. We've met with Governor Abbott. No action was taken. We're not going to stop. We're going to keep going. But again, this isn't who we are. This isn't who we want to be. Jacqueline was 10 years old. She was 10 years old, and she passed away at 1:15. Can you tell me when this event started? 11:33, 11:34. You heard Senator Gutierrez tell the story about the events, the failures, the miscommunication, the lack of courage, the lack of leadership. She would have been given an opportunity to live if all of the law enforcement, including the highly regarded Department of Public Safety, had followed their training and most importantly, had the courage to confront the shooter. But we, and most importantly, you all know that it wasn't the lack of just the training or the courage that kept them, the law enforcement, from saving lives. It was a fear of the weapon that was used. And yet, we don't hear you all speak about this at all. Department of Public Safety. So 5 months later, here we are learning the details of the massacre, and mostly from who? The media. Why? Why does it have to happen that way? You know, school and law enforcement personnel are being suspended, terminated, or retiring on their own accord. Sometimes they blame us. Yes, we put the pressure, right? In some cases, some of us agree that they should be. In all cases, and possibly retire. Like McCraw here had said that he would retire if there's been failures in his department. we don't always agree, and I'm sorry that with some of the family members that, and I'll share that with you here on his retirement. I mean, this is really the pressure that we're doing, and we're working to have some of the leaders retire. I believe it's clearly, and like I think you would agree with this, is for the lack of leadership. In regards to the Department of Public Safety, all we want are answers and full transparency. Some of us believe that your director should retire for his lack of leadership. However, some of us worry that the continued retirements will only hinder the ongoing investigations. So we ask that you take urgency and responsibility and tell us where you and your departments are on the investigation and how soon we will have a complete report. Why? Well, we're told constantly to find closure in this. Well, closure to our families is not an option until we have the answers and hold those responsible accountable. Please work with us to get there and get there soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rizzo. Is there anyone else from Uvalde, from the family, or from a family wishing to give comment?
I was going to, but at this moment I can't.
I understand.
The only thing I can ask is, you know, for these people to be trained better. That's all I can say right now at this moment.
I want to thank the families for being here today. We can only imagine how difficult this has been for all of you. Our hearts as parents, as aunts and uncles, ourselves, goes out to each and every one of you and the community of Uvalde. So thank you for being here today and for giving us your thoughts on the matter. I'm now going to call on Dr. Monica Martinez, who's also going to speak on Uvalde.
Good morning, Commissioners. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I'm a historian and author, a professor, and Uvalde is my hometown. My book, The Injustice Never Leaves You, recovers a period of racial terror in Texas between 1910 and 1920, when Mexican Americans and Mexican nationals were targeted with racial violence. Hundreds of people were killed, men, women, and children. People who witnessed this era frequently referred to it as La Matanza, the massacre. My research into lynchings and massacres 100 years ago could not have prepared me for the horrors of the Uvalde massacre and the cruelty months after the massacre. Provide two historical examples that teach us urgent historical lessons that I hope you will learn from. In September 1915 in South Texas, two landowning American citizens, Antonio Longoria and Jesus Bazan, met with Texas Rangers to report that they had been robbed. While returning home, the two men were shot in the back by a posse that included a Texas Ranger captain. There were no investigations, no one was ever prosecuted, and it was painful and a frightening injustice for the survivors, the relatives of those two men, to live in the presence of law enforcement carrying Colt .44 revolvers, who participated in that murder and had long careers in law enforcement. Norma Longoria Rodriguez is a San Antonio resident who has long-standing unanswered questions about the murder of her grandfather and great-grandfather. She asks, did they suffer? Did they die immediately? We hope they did. She hopes that death came quickly and that they did not suffer in pain. These are questions that have gone unanswered for generations, thanks in no small part to Texas Rangers that intimidated residents not to investigate or speak of the double murder. In January 1918, a group of Texas Rangers, U.S. soldiers, and civilians traveled to Porvenir, Texas, in West Texas, and arrested 15 men and boys. The Texas Rangers opened fire, massacring the 15 prisoners in cold blood. In the immediate aftermath of the massacre, the Texas Ranger captain submitted multiple false reports. But the brutality of that massacre could not be hidden because there were witnesses. The families of the victims, including children, testified about what they saw, leading to state, federal, and international investigations. And yet, despite these investigations by the Mexican and US governments, no civilians or officers were ever prosecuted. The surviving relatives carried the long-standing feelings of injustice as months and years passed and as the actions of the Texas Rangers were whitewashed. It took over 100 years for any state agencies in Texas to acknowledge the Porvenir massacre of 1918 and the double murder of Jesus Bazan and Antonio Longoria in 1915 as tragedies. Families in Uvalde should not have anything in common with the victims that survived the massacres of 100 years ago. Unfortunately, they do. Painfully, they do. They are bearing the burden of having to call for justice, pleading for transparency and accountability after surviving the horrors of the Uvalde massacre. Unfortunately, historical patterns are being repeated today. Texas DPS should learn from the fast to expedite their investigations into the tragedy of Uvalde, my hometown. In the aftermath of the Uvalde massacre, false reports of law enforcement actions were made in front of news cameras, but there were children and teachers that survived that knew those accounts were not accurate. There were parents on May 24th that stood outside Robb Elementary begging for law enforcement to protect their children. Those parents knew then, days after, that those accounts were not accurate. And 5 months later, families still have their most basic questions unanswered. Families should be able to grieve. And as you've heard from Mr. Cross today, instead they are having to review evidence. They are searching for answers in the crumbs of evidence that have been released. Families should not have to review evidence to look for answers. They should be able to grieve. The families that have traveled to Austin and Washington, D.C. to plead for transparency and accountability, that families have to do that is cruel. If these investigations are being delayed until after November elections, that is calculated cruelty. I beg you to have compassion for the families of Uvalde, who DPS officers took an oath to protect and serve, and answer their questions. History shows us that every day the questions of Uvalde families go unanswered. They experience more harm. Feelings of injustice and mistrust continue to grow. And the Uvalde community is prevented from being able to start the long and difficult process of healing. DPS must be truthful about the massacres of the past and the massacre at Robb Elementary. Governors of the past and the people that they appointed to positions of power failed to demand transparency and accountability 100 years ago. It's time for this commission to break historical patterns. Answer these families' questions. Allow Uvalde to begin to heal. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. Is there anybody else wishing to give public comment on Uvalde? With that, I'm going to turn it over to the director at this point to begin his director's report and give his perspective on the tragedy.
Commissioners, family members, Senator, obviously there's nothing worse. I mean, there's no greater crime against humanity than killing of a child. And there's nothing I can say that can alleviate your pain, period. It's not going to happen. I'm not that eloquent. I just can't come up with the words. And I can tell you that that Friday at that press conference, the hardest thing that I've ever had to do in my life was stand up there and say that we have failed. Plain and simple. And Senator, you're right. You know, he arrived, he entered the building at 11:33. It was 1 hour, 14 minutes and 8 seconds. There's no question about it. When he arrived, he shot at 2 funeral home employees. He jumped the fence. He had a rifle. He had ammunition. He was an active shooter then. He remained an active shooter throughout the ordeal, period. He was always an active shooter, plain and simple. And as I testified, or I stated publicly, and sadly, the facts remain the same, and nothing's going to change it. That 5 minutes into that situation, that tragic, that horrific situation, after the subject walked into room 111 and 112, 5 minutes afterwards, okay, there was enough officers, there was enough equipment, there was enough knowledge, there was enough information to do what needed to be done immediately. And Senator, you're exactly right. That thing should have been terminated within 10 minutes, period. That's the active shooter protocol. There's no time for shields, there's no time for weapons, there's no time for strategy, there's no time for evacuations even. It is the post-Columbine protocol is very clear. It's an active shooter. Stop the killing, absolutely. That didn't happen. Stop the dying is the second part of it. And you can't call it or treat it anything other than an active shooter if there's children that have been shot in a classroom, period. It's an active shooter situation, bar none. And I realize that was not a popular thing to say. I got it. And I had the benefit of hindsight to sit there. And I don't like criticizing our local partners. Our job is to support them, plain and simple. But by God, right is right, and we were wrong. It's not a cop-out saying that we as a profession failed. And we did respond with resources. There's no question about it. I made it very clear at the time, we're going to evaluate every DPS officer. There's a reason why we had not just Texas Rangers interview DPS responding officers, we had the FBI participated as well. Because we knew at that point in time that, wait a minute, this thing is wrong. And every responding officer needs to be accountable for their actions. When did they arrive? What were they told? What did they know? And then what did they do? Plain and simple. And I don't care how high it goes. All those things are important. And you're right. One of our core values is accountability. Accept responsibility, plain and simple. And I did make that statement to CNN. And I can tell you this, if DP as an institution failed the families, failed the school, or failed, the community of Uvalde, then absolutely, I need to go. But I can tell you this right now, DPS as an institution, right now, did not fail the community, plain and simple. And there were actions, and I can tell you, there were things that we aren't proud about. And we had two people, I talked 10 minutes, we had two people inside the building within that 10 minutes. At 22 minutes, we had another third. We had at 24 minutes, we had 4 people inside that building. And more resources kept coming. There were 70 overall. Every one of those officers, including leadership, is being evaluated. And when we're done with it, there's going to be a peer review. It's not going to be what Steve McCraw thinks, it's not going to be what the deputy directors think, not what DPS thinks. We want, and quite frankly, and Senator, you recall it well, it was June 2nd that I called you. I promised you information on that Friday. And I called you and said, sir, I can't provide it to you because the district attorney is going to review every officer in that hallway for the criminal culpability. Sure, the subject is dead. So what's the criminal investigation? Well, the criminal investigation is looking at police officers, plain and simple. And I took an oath long ago, and I've never in my career, as a federal agent, as a Department of Public Safety officer, and I can't find any instances in the department when the district attorney says, don't share this information, and then we go out and share it, and the district attorney, regardless, the district attorney says, don't do that because I think it's going to impact my ability to prosecute going forward. It doesn't matter. Hey, these are police officers that are being looked at. Why should we treat them anyway differently? We shouldn't, plain and simple. And she's going to be able to make that particular call. I think the families are right about how long is this investigation going to continue. I can tell you that the Texas Ranger part of that investigation is going to be concluded within 2 months, by the end of the year. The paperwork is going to go, the file is going to go to the district attorney. And I got one proviso on this, though, is that the district attorney, first the autopsies hadn't been completed, and that's critical to this thing, because how many kids, the question is, how many kids did die in that room, or teachers died because they missed that magic hour you talked about, Senator, or the 15 minutes or whatever long it took to get to them. Because it's not just stop the killing, you got to stop the dying. They were in there. It was an active shooter. And we didn't get through that door. We didn't go through the windows. Plain and simple. And we, law enforcement, should have done it. And that protocol is never going to change, plain and simple. So I can tell you that, yeah, you'll get the investigation will be to the district attorney within 2 months, period. Okay, I can't tell you with the medical review part and that assessment that she needs, and I believe it makes sense that you would medical professionals review it and decide, make the decisions, or provide the expert testimony whether someone could have been saved or could not have been saved. That's something outside of our bailiwick and certainly outside. There are some other nuances in terms of the analysis being done by the FBI, but the bottom line is the Texas Ranger investigation will be completed by the end of the year. I'm not going to go into some of the things that the senator did about this. I will take, and maybe obviously I should have apologized a lot sooner. I did say the teacher pushed the rock, placed the rock in the door. I said that on that Friday and didn't correct it until the next week. And we didn't, at the time, that's exactly the information that we had. But it was wrong. And I take responsibility for it. And when we found out about it, we certainly corrected it on the record. This teacher, she propped up on the door with rock, but she did go back. And she made a 911 call too, as well. And she did go back to that door, and she did knock the rock outside of the door and closed it. Unfortunately, the door was unlocked. And that matters, because if you want to look at this in terms of the totality of this thing, there's this multiple points of failure. The first point is, why didn't we stop this guy in the first place? Like we did 3 years previously on the two individuals that wanted to shoot up the Uvalde High School. Why did we prevent it from happening? This guy was on a pathway to violence for 6 months. We know absolutely. And this guy there was information out there. People knew information. It was out there. Why didn't we know that? Why didn't we prevent that? The only thing that was right is keeping him out of that classroom. Plain and simple. That's the only way to save those children's lives. He should have never got into that school. The second point, we talked about it before, is that he went seamlessly into it. You know, that door should have been locked. It wasn't locked. But certainly the classroom door to 111 was locked, but it wasn't secured. Every second matters. If we could have had officers going to that hallway at 11:36, okay, if they were in that hallway, then they could have taken him out, period. He wouldn't have had an opportunity. Ideally, the same thing on the front end before he even gets in the building. So I absolutely get it. And I don't expect any parent ever to forgive something like this. I mean, the most heinous crime I said was killing a child. But this is like premeditated mass murder of elementary school children. It's a crime of mass devastation. To the families, there's no question about it. To the school, what about the other school children there? The teachers there, but the entire community. And the last thing we wanted to do in the Department of Public Safety is create problems within the community. On the contrary, it's to do what we can to help the community. And I know that right now, based upon the requests, yeah, we're providing school security. Well, it's great now, okay? And we'll continue to do so as long as we need to. And I realize there's a gang problem in Uvalde based upon the mayor's discussion with the governor. And we sent 12 additional troopers to help the Uvalde Police Department because the most impacted people are the family members. But others were impacted as well, including the police department. And I probably didn't help matters any by being as brutally candid. And I tell you today, nothing's changed in terms of my view of the world. Is what that should have happened. Something should have happened within that 10 minutes period. It was always an active shooter. There should never have been any delay. There's just no excuse for it. And by saying that, I realize that caused great grief and consternation by anybody who was in the hallway at that particular point in time. And I got it. But that doesn't change. Plain and simple. And it's not going to change, unfortunately. So at the end of the day, this is an absolute tragedy. And we'll do what we can to support the community and continue to do it. And I don't expect ever to forgiveness. I don't expect, anything at all except, what you feel right now. And Senator, we had a great relationship at one time. I hate that it was, this destroyed it. You've done much for the state. You've done much for the Department of Public Safety, our men and women. plain and simple. And I'll always be grateful to you for that. But at the same point, when the district attorney asks me not to talk to somebody or provide information, I'm going to abide by that, period. I can tell you this, from the department, when I talk to our troops, I meet with them. I meet with them in service. We talk about this thing. We talk about doctrine. How can we change this? For the Department of Public Safety standpoint, going forward, and this has been made clear long ago, there's no such thing as a barricaded subject, plain and simple. When you go into a school, there's an active shooter in a school, he remains one period until the individual's terminated. That's the end of it. And you continue to move forward until that's it. So there's no reason for delay or wait in that regard. You know, troopers, rangers, and special agents with DPS are now empowered to move forward and act, plain and simple. And if we ever get such a tragic situation again where there's delay, unnecessary delay, that's fine. Okay, other things, okay, training with schools, all the things, try to get better so we as a team can support our local partners and can respond better. We'll continue to do so. And that's our, obligation as a state agency is to always to improve. But I'm not going to sit here and say that Department of Public Safety is without fault, but we're not. I'm not going to say that, plain and simple. I made it very clear that we're going to evaluate every officer, we're going to do process, and we've had a review panel, every one of the officers have been reviewed, will continue to be reviewed. If we find any reason that they didn't meet DPS standards or violated the active shooter protocol, they're being investigated by the Office of Inspector General, reports to the Public Safety Commission, and that's Inspector General Philip Ayala. And I've got great confidence in him in terms of conduct these investigations. I can tell you right now, someone had resigned while under investigation, is not eligible to come back. Someone is under the termination process right now. And there's more, to look at. There's other officers to look at, and we'll continue to look at them. I had some other things to discuss, Chairman and Commissioners, but I want to be very clear is that the most important thing is I'd rather even allow the family members to respond. I know it's not usually, but I think that, they're so important. This is what it's about today, is if in lieu of, usually closing out in terms of talking points, I'd like to give them an opportunity, or the senator, to respond.
Would any of the family members like to respond?
So you said that you would resign if there was any culpability, correct?
DPS as an institution failed the city
Okay.
of Uvalde.
So your
and I will
officers
be-
were
I will
in
be
there?
glad to.
Your officers were in there within 10 minutes, correct?
Yeah.
Are they not representatives of your department?
Absolutely.
Therefore, they failed?
Absolutely.
Therefore, DPS failed? Therefore, there was culpability? Therefore, if you are a man of your word,
Yeah.
then you would retire?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, it doesn't seem like you're going to do that because you keep talking in circles and doing all that mess and everything. And listen, you can get irritated all you want. I lost my damn son.
You have
Your
a right.
anger is not going to outmatch mine, man.
Well, hey, guess what? I'm not angry. I'm hurt. If anything else, I am absolutely devastated what happened to Uvalde. And
Are you a man of your word?
Absolutely.
Then resign.
Okay, thank you.
I just have a few questions for you. Multiple failures, law enforcement.
Yeah.
Of all the failures, you failed to mention that they had the courage, they didn't have the courage to go in there. One shooter, 91 of your officers, including other law enforcement agencies. Why didn't they go in there?
He should have been terminated within 10 minutes,
Right.
period, plain and simple.
What were they afraid of, sir?
Everyone is, like I said, everyone's being evaluated.
What is the number one weapon that is being used for mass shootings all over America? And you all know it. And we choose not to do anything about it. So if we keep doing the same thing, Mr. McCraw, and expect a different result, it's insanity.
Yes, sir.
Now, we need to, as a community, as a state, as a public agency, to speak out and do something, because do you not think that it's going to happen again?
I'm afraid it is.
It is.
I'm afraid it is.
And your law enforcement officers and I've spoken to the Chief of Police Association, Jimmy Perdue. They don't want these weapons on our streets for citizens to use. We failed to raise the age to 21. The governor will not do it. Can you put pressure on him to do it, or do you want your officers to stop somebody someday and get torn to pieces like our children did? Because that's what happened. You saw the video, right?
Absolutely.
You saw it.
Absolutely.
Our children, your children should not have to go through that. Your grandchildren, our families should not have to go through that. I'll leave it with that, but I think that if we don't do anything about it, it will happen again. Why? Because it's happened before.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for your loss.
You know, thank you, Commissioner and Commissioners. I would ask you to go watch the videos of the agency that you regulate. I would ask you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I'm going to guess that you haven't seen them. You don't have to answer. But I would ask you to see the actions of your DPS agents. And I do have a question for Colonel McCraw, and I've asked him many
Yes,
in a
sir.
Senate hearing. We talked about different things, misinformation that was done. There was an alert report that was put out, and pardon the colloquialism, but it was chock full of lies. That was done 60 days after the fact, where you had a statement that said, because see, the problem with your agency, sir, is that you become more of a political animal for a certain party and a certain person. All anybody in this room need to do is go look to your Twitter page and talk about how wonderful our governor is and this and that and the other. See, we don't have a Hatch Act like you had when you were a federal agent. That's gone. So you put out a false alert report, completely false, that said that a Uvalde PD officer had a chance to shoot the shooter, knowing full well that the balance of that report, or that statement, suggested that the person he could have shot was the PE coach.
Well, you consider you and I could discuss that offline. In fact, I'd enjoy doing that. But we didn't produce the alert report. Someone else did. It wasn't our report. And there's some information you probably need to know or are not aware of.
Like you said, you and I had been friends, and we've had a relationship.
Yeah.
And apparently now there is very little communication between myself and your
Well,
department,
I would like to change
other
that
than me having to sign a non-disclosure agreement every time I talk to you.
I'd like to change that right now.
Because I am,
I wanna-
it's a piss poor excuse
I wanna be-
to
I wanna
hear
be
that
able-
a
I wanna
district
be-
attorney is
Yeah.
doing a criminal investigation when she told these families that nobody's going to be indicted. So if nobody's going to be indicted, then what are we doing here? Then you're holding information that these people want to see. They don't want to see their dead kids. They don't want to see any of that. They want to know who failed. And who failed was every law enforcement agency at the scene, and even the BORTAC team. Even the BORTAC team that waited. But somehow, it was ironic. One of your PIO, I think, said I was playing a game of telephone one day when I suggested to a news reporter a statement that you gave me. When you said that there was 12 officers in that hallway, and this person you have working for you said that he's playing a game of telephone with a newspaper. Must be a lie. You later retracted all of that, and you told the truth that there was 12 officers in that hallway in that same day. And you know why that happened. You know why your agency ended up telling the truth. But the interesting thing about what his statement was, a game of telephone, that's what he told that reporter. The interesting thing about that was just what happened in that hallway. A BORTAC officer arrived and said, I'm here to help. My team's on their way. They're about 45 minutes out. And all of a sudden, that turned into this. We're waiting on BORTAC. We're waiting for a federal agency that doesn't have jurisdiction to come in and do our jobs. That's what happened on that day, and you know it.
Yes, sir. I don't disagree with that characterization. And I'll tell you this, it was an abject failure, period.
On every agency that was there, including the Department of Public
I
Safety.
agree. I agree.
And you've allowed your officers, and the one thing that you haven't given me, I've asked for GPS data on where their cars were.
Okay.
And I want that data.
I
I
will-
want to know where Joel Betancourt was.
I'll be glad to provide that to you.
You know, you have,
Yeah.
what has happened here on this day and everything prior to it and after this, and the prior, you know what that's been, the farce that is Operation Lone Star. And that man that was in that hallway, Joel Betancourt, that is called and asked for this delay. You know everything about him as well.
Yeah.
And you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. And I realize that, and that I'll be glad to share you the GPS coordinates. Plain and simple. In
Mr. Chairman,
fact, I'd be glad, and certainly I've got the ability to do it through the non-disclosures, to be able to give you the updated timeline. You know exactly where every DPS officer is, period. Plain and simple.
Mr. Chairman, the last thing I want to do is come in here and put on a show. And the last thing I wanted to do all summer long was to hang out with these people in the back all the time. The only thing that could happen was I met 19 wonderful families and a bunch of others whose kids got injured. This is highly, highly personal to me. Highly personal. And while it may seem irrational at times, I promise you that when you get to know these families and you see what happened out there, you'll understand that it is very rational. And you'll see that not just his agency failed, the legislature failed. It failed the day that they allow all these kids to have guns like this that's happening across this nation, across this state. We have a lot of work to do, and we're going to need some real leadership by your agency to direct the governor to do the things that he's supposed to do. You are his appointees. So with that, I thank you very much, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you to everybody who was here today to speak on Uvalde. Is there anybody else in the room wishing to give a public comment on Uvalde? Hearing none, we will go into recess for about 15 minutes before we continue on with the rest of our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.